It's funny, or maybe just cruelly ironic, how you can spend years living with someone and still not really know them at all. That was Sophia for me. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple. People would look at us, hell, I used to look at us and think we had it all figured out. Our house was everything you'd imagine. Pristine, just a short drive from the city, with the grass always cut, the bushes neatly trimmed, and the seasonal decorations up like clockwork. I thought we were a team, partners in this life we'd built. But as it turns out, she had her own plans. In the beginning, everything felt right. We'd been married 5 years, and we were living what people would call a good life. I had a stable job in finance, bringing in a comfortable salary, so Sophia didn't have to worry about finances. She worked with a charity, something she was genuinely passionate about. I'd be away on business trips every now and then, but when I was home, we made a point to spend time together. We traveled, had regular date nights, and did everything that, in my mind, kept a relationship strong. But looking back, I can't help but wonder if it was all just a facade. Maybe for me, or maybe even for her. The first sign that something wasn't right was subtle. Maybe a missed call, or a text that went unanswered. It wasn't like Sophia to be secretive with me. I tried to brush it off. After all, we're adults, not teenagers who need to be attached at the hip. But as time passed, the little changes in her behavior piled up, each one adding to this growing, uneasy feeling that I couldn't shake. She started going out more, especially in the evenings, which was unusual for her. At first, I'd ask casually, "Where are you headed?" And she'd give me some excuse like, work meeting or just seeing some friends. Friends I'd never heard of, and meetings that seemed to have no real schedule. When I pressed her, she'd throw me the usual lines, "You know I've got work," or "I just need some time to myself." I wanted to believe her. I really did. I wanted to think she just needed space. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I came home late. I don't remember the specifics of the day, just that I was exhausted and ready to crawl into bed. Sophia was already asleep, her phone face down on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't dream of touching her phone. It's personal, right? But that night, something felt different. Like I couldn't ignore this growing suspicion any longer. So while she slept, I grabbed her phone. There was a message on her lock screen, just one line, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. "Your wife is cheating on you. It's someone close to you." No name, no other context. Just that one gut punch of a sentence. I read it again, trying to process it. Who would send something like this? It felt too direct, too personal to be a prank. And why would someone close to us want to hurt me like that? I just sat there for a few minutes, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it all. Part of me wanted to wake her up, demand she explain herself, but I didn't. Instead, I locked the phone, put it back exactly where it was, and lay in the dark, pretending like I didn't know a thing. But, of course, from that moment on, everything changed. I couldn't look at her the same way. Every little thing she did that seemed even remotely suspicious became another reason to doubt her. The next morning, I tried to act normal, but I could barely get through breakfast without staring at her, wondering if she knew I knew. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I asked her outright, "Sophia, who sent you that message last night? Someone saying you're cheating on me?" Her reaction was almost believable. She looked surprised, wide-eyed, and then started laughing, but it didn't sound right. It was forced, shaky. "Are you serious?" she said, barely looking me in the eye. "That's ridiculous. Probably just one of my friends messing around. I have no idea who would send something like that." "Come on, Ethan, you don't actually believe that, do you?" I didn't say anything. I just kept watching her. And for a moment, I swear I saw something in her eyes that wasn't just surprise or disbelief. Maybe it was fear? I'm not sure, but it was enough to set off alarms in my head. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the more she tried to brush it off, the more I felt like she was hiding something. I stayed calm, telling her, if it was a joke, it was a cruel one. She nodded, giving me that fake, reassuring smile she'd been wearing a lot lately. Over the next few days, I tried to let it go. But every time she left the house, that damn message looped in my mind. I started noticing things, the way she'd leave her phone around but suddenly start locking it, or how she'd head out without saying where she was going. The way she'd shut me out when I asked about her day, like there was some part of her life I wasn't allowed into. Eventually, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I knew I had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. I contacted an investigator I knew, Tom. He'd helped me with some business stuff in the past, and I trusted him. When I called, I tried to sound calm, but I could hear in his voice that he knew something was wrong. "Tom," I said, voice shaky, "I need you to look into someone for me." The words tasted like sandpaper in my mouth, admitting I didn't trust my own wife. Tom didn't ask questions, just said he'd get on it. I hung up, staring at my phone, wondering if I just opened a door I couldn't close. Tom wasted no time. Within days, I was getting dry, matter-of-fact updates. At first, everything seemed normal. Sophia was going to work, meeting friends, doing yoga. She was sticking to her routine, like she knew someone was watching. But I knew Tom, he wouldn't stop digging until he found something, if there was something to find. The days dragged on with nothing out of the ordinary. Every night, I'd wait for Tom's update, heart racing, torn between wanting answers and dreading them. After nearly a week, Tom finally dropped a bombshell. He told me Sophia had been spending a lot of time with one of her colleagues, a senior manager at her charity named Lucas. I'd met Lucas once or twice before, and back then, I didn't think much of him. Just another guy in Sophia's world, the kind of people she'd always surrounded herself with. But now, hearing his name again, my stomach twisted. Tom kept following her, trailing her to work, to lunch, even to those late nights at the office she'd started having. One evening, he texted to say she left work with Lucas. They walked together, laughing, like they had some private joke. Tom followed them to a quiet restaurant where they sat close, leaning in, looking so comfortable with each other. The way they looked at one another didn't seem like just two co-workers. Later that night, Tom told me they left the restaurant together, climbed into Lucas's car, and drove off, straight toward my house. My house. I couldn't stop picturing them in the place I had built for her and me, the home we had made together. The thought of him, someone I barely knew, sharing those private moments in the space that was supposed to be ours made my skin crawl. I wanted to confront her then and there, storm in and demand answers, but something told me to wait. Felt too obvious, too easy. I'd seen her cover her tracks before. She'd twist this around, make it seem like a misunderstanding, and I'd probably buy it like I had so many times before. No, I needed undeniable proof. Tom kept at it, tailing her for another few days. Sophia stayed on her usual path, but every now and then, I'd get updates from Tom saying she'd met Lucas. Each time I saw them getting closer, but something about it felt off. It was too clean, too easy. Like she was intentionally making herself visible with Lucas, like she wanted me, or anyone who might be watching, to see them together. It felt wrong. But before I could bring it up to Tom, his updates took a sudden, unexpected turn. A few days later, Tom called me directly. His voice was steady, but I could tell he was rattled. He told me he'd seen Sophia with someone else. Not Lucas, my father, William. At first, I didn't understand what he was saying. My father? The man who raised me, who'd always been there, who'd always called Sophia his perfect daughter-in-law. Tom tried to soften the blow, but nothing could have prepared me for what he was about to say. He told me he'd been following Sophia one night when she met my father at a small bar outside of town. They didn't sit in plain view. Instead, they found a dark corner, sitting close, as though they were sharing intimate secrets. Tom said their closeness wasn't just familial, it felt much more personal. I didn't want to believe it. I told Tom to keep following them. There had to be some innocent explanation. But even as I tried to convince myself, I could feel the truth gnawing at me. It sat heavy in my gut. For the next few days, Tom stayed on their trail, but I felt like I was the one being watched. Every night, he'd call or text with updates. Felt like poison, dripping into my mind, little by little. Finally, Tom told me he'd followed them to a hotel. They had arrived separately, but went in together hand in hand. I kept thinking this can't be real. But Tom, always the cold, methodical professional, sent me video clips. One of them showed Sophia, her face unmistakably clear, leaning into my father's shoulder, whispering something in his ear as they walked toward their room. That same room they stayed in for hours. I felt something inside me snap. I didn't even realize my hands were shaking until the phone almost slipped from my grasp. Every memory of our life together flashed before my eyes, twisted and deformed. Every hug, every kiss, every private moment I'd shared with my father. It all felt like a lie. A couple of days later, Tom delivered everything in one final package. I was barely holding myself together, sitting in my office, staring at the footage and photos he'd sent. I couldn't tear my eyes away, even though I knew I couldn't unsee any of it. My wife, my father, two people I had loved, trusted beyond belief. I felt sick, but I kept watching. I needed to understand. I needed to know if there was any part of me that could still deny what I was seeing. Tom didn't offer advice. He simply told me the decision was mine, that he'd done his job. Part of me was grateful that he hadn't pushed me to act one way or another, but I was left with the shattered remains of my life, staring at the people I thought I knew and realizing just how much of a fool I'd been. I spent that night awake, alone in the dark, crushed under the weight of betrayal. I wanted to scream, to break everything in sight, but I couldn't move. I just sat there, replaying every detail of the last few days. I couldn't shake the image of them together. Every time I closed my eyes, it was like they were right there, mocking me, daring me to confront them. What was I supposed to do now? How could I face either of them knowing what they'd done? The world I had built, the trust one thought was unbreakable, had been shattered. And yet, somewhere beneath all that anger and despair, there was something else, something cold, calculating. I wanted them to pay, not just for the betrayal but for the damage they had done. The next morning I called Tom back. I asked him for advice. He paused for a long moment before saying, "Ethan, this decision is yours. Just remember, whatever you do, there's no going back." His words hung in the air, a warning, but it didn't scare me. Not anymore. There comes a point after a betrayal like this when you start to wonder if maybe you're just misinterpreting things. You try to convince yourself it's all a mistake, a misunderstanding, like there's some kind of reason that could explain everything away. But deep down, you know better. The evidence is undeniable. The lies she told me, the images of my father in those videos. Those memories haunt me like ghosts, reminding me that everything I thought I knew was nothing but a carefully crafted illusion. Still, I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to face Sophia. Part of me thought maybe if I gave her the chance to confess, it wouldn't feel like my whole world was falling apart. So, I picked a place we used to visit often, a quiet restaurant where we shared some of our best memories. I wanted to keep it low-key, almost like nothing had changed, just another evening with my wife like we were any other couple. She showed up a few minutes late, looking so effortlessly innocent, like she had no idea the storm that was about to hit. And that smile, God, that smile. The one I used to think meant she loved me. Seeing it now felt like a slap to the face, knowing exactly what I knew. But I managed to smile back, even though everything inside me was screaming. I asked about her day, tried to keep the conversation light. Then the act was over. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I leaned forward, keeping my voice quiet and steady, and said, "Sophia, I know about the affair." Her face shifted instantly. She looked like I had just slapped her. She blinked, opening her mouth and closing it again, and then let out this nervous laugh, like she thought it was some kind of joke. "What are you talking about, Ethan?" she said, that smile coming back again, too forced to be real. "There's no affair." I stared her down, letting her see the certainty in my eyes. "I know, Sophia, all of it. I know about you and Lucas. And I know about you and my father." Her expression froze, and for the first time, I saw her mask slip. She didn't laugh this time. She just looked away, her fingers nervously twirling the napkin, as if it could somehow shield her from the truth. But then, just like always, she tried to twist the story around, make me believe it was all a big misunderstanding. "Ethan," she said, her voice shaky in that way that always made her sound innocent. "You've got it wrong. Lucas is just a friend. And your father?" "Stop lying." I cut her off, barely holding it together. I've seen the videos, Sophia. I know everything. Quit trying to pull the wool over my eyes. Her eyes widened, her face draining of color. For a moment, I thought she might break down. But instead, she just leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms in a defensive, childlike way. Fine, she snapped, her tone suddenly hard. But it's not what you think. It was just a moment of weakness. It doesn't mean anything. A moment of weakness? I couldn't help but laugh, but it was bitter. So bitter that the sound almost echoed. A moment of weakness that lasted for how long, Sophia? Weeks? Months? Just tell me the truth. But she wouldn't. She just sat there, avoiding my gaze, holding on to whatever flimsy excuse she thought could save her. I felt the last bit of my patience snap. I stood up abruptly, slamming a few bills on the table. "We're done here," I said, not waiting for her response. I couldn't stand to be near her for another second. I didn't go home right away. I drove straight to my parents' house. I had one last person to face, one last person to get answers from. My father was home when I arrived, and he looked surprised to see me standing there. He tried to greet me with a smile, but it didn't matter. I wasn't here for pleasantries. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "We need to talk, right now." He looked away, avoiding my gaze as if he was ashamed, but it was too late for that. "I don't know what to say, Ethan. It just happened. I was going through a rough patch, a midlife crisis or whatever they call it." He tried to laugh it off, but I didn't let him. "A midlife crisis?" My voice cracked with rage. "That's your excuse? You destroyed everything because you were going through a rough time? Do you even hear yourself?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. "How long?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long has this been going on?" He turned his face away, his jaw clenched in guilt. Then he finally admitted it. "A few months. It was never meant to be serious. I didn't think it would hurt you like this." I wanted to scream, to hit something, to make him feel the pain I was carrying. But I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring at the man who was supposed to be my father, feeling like I was looking at a complete stranger. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why would you do this to me?" He didn't answer. He just sat there, looking miserable, and all I felt was hollow. This man, who I had looked up to my entire life, had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and he couldn't even tell me why. When I finally left, it felt like I was walking out of a nightmare. Everything I thought I knew, everything I believed in, was gone. Sophia, the woman I loved, turned out to be a lie. And my father, the man I trusted above all else, had shattered everything I believed in. I went home, but it didn't feel like home anymore. The house, the furniture, the pictures of Sophia and me, they all felt foreign, like I was living in some twisted, distorted version of my life. Even the wedding photos made me feel nauseous. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of it all, but there was no making sense of it. Sophia and my father had torn apart everything I held dear, and there was no going back. I knew I couldn't keep pretending, couldn't keep any connection with the people who had destroyed me. After confronting them, I was empty. But beneath the emptiness, something darker started to rise. I wanted them to pay. Quietly moving on, pretending none of this ever happened. That would be letting them off too easily. No, I needed more. I needed to make them feel what I felt. So, I spent days thinking it through, imagining all the ways I could hurt them, make them suffer. And every time I came back to the same conclusion: exposure. They'd torn my world apart, and now it was their turn. I went through everything Tom had given me: videos, photos, recorded conversations, the kind of evidence that no one could argue with. The pile of proof was a grotesque catalog of betrayal, and I could barely look at it without feeling a rush of nausea. I knew the impact of releasing it all would be catastrophic. They would lose everything: reputations, careers, their very lives as they knew them. But by that point, I didn't care anymore. I had tried to play nice, given them a chance to come clean, and they had thrown it all back in my face. So that evening, I set up an anonymous social media account, meticulously putting everything together, preparing it all to go public. When I hit post, something cold and satisfying settled in my chest. Within hours, the videos and photos were circulating, shared over and over again. Each post exposed another layer of their lies. I sat behind the screen, watching as the views skyrocketed, reading the angry comments flooding in. The truth was out now. Sophia's so-called charity work, her entire do-gooder persona, crumbled in an instant. Her reputation, built on a lie, turned into a laughingstock. As for my father, the man everyone had admired, his public image evaporated. People were furious. Sophia and William were now the latest scandal, and I made sure every corner of the internet knew it. The fallout was swift and brutal. News outlets picked up the story, and headlines screamed across websites. Gossip columns gleefully ran with the scandal. The people they'd surrounded themselves with, the same ones who once celebrated their image of goodness, now recoiled in disgust. Comments poured in from all directions, picking apart every detail of their downfall. I knew it was harsh, but with every word that condemned them, a small part of me felt vindicated. They had hurt me. Now it was their turn to face the consequences. Sophia was blindsided. I heard from mutual friends that she was scrambling to set the record straight, claiming it had all been a mistake, a lapse in judgment. She tried to convince anyone who would listen that this one mistake didn't define her. But no one was buying it. Her professional network turned their backs on her. Her good deeds were now questioned at every turn. Her friends, the ones who had always defended her, cut her off one by one. Sophia had isolated me throughout our marriage, but now it was her turn to be isolated. William wasn't faring much better. Word spread quickly through family that his wife had filed for divorce the day after the scandal broke. His business partners, the people who had worked alongside him for years, began pulling out of their deals, distancing themselves from him and his tarnished reputation. My father, the man who'd always appeared untouchable, whose place in the world had always seemed certain, was now a shadow of that. For once, he was facing the full weight of his selfish choices. The more I watched, the more I saw how deep the damage went. Sophia's career was in ruins. Her social life vanished as the people who had once worshipped her now saw her as a joke. She was left clinging to whatever scraps of dignity she could salvage, but it was a lost cause. William faced the same fate. His professional and personal life were falling apart. It was like everything they had built up, everything they had relied on to keep up their charade, was crumbling beneath them. They were standing in the wreckage they had created. At first, I thought revenge would bring me closure, that seeing them suffer would somehow make the pain they caused me feel more bearable. And, in a way, it did. Watching them lose everything gave me a sense of justice, a dark satisfaction that they were finally facing the fallout of their actions. But when it was all said and done, I was left with an unexpected emptiness. I had gotten what I wanted. They had lost everything, just as I had. But the damage was done, and there was no undoing it. The hurt they had caused me couldn't be erased by watching them suffer. Even with that dark sense of satisfaction, something still gnawed at me. The emptiness didn't go away. The betrayal, the lies, the public humiliation. It all left a mark deeper than I had anticipated. Once I exposed Sophia and my father to the world, the next step was inevitable. I had to sever all ties with her. I wasn't sure what to expect when I told her I was filing for divorce. I thought she might try to play it cool, act like she was relieved that it was finally over. But when I handed her the papers, her face betrayed everything. She wasn't prepared for me to follow through. She thought, even after everything, that I'd just let her stay in my life. She was wrong. My lawyers moved quickly. The public exposure of her affair with my father had destroyed whatever leverage she thought she had left. Sophia tried to fight back, throwing out excuses about how I had been distant, how our marriage had been falling apart before her mistake. Watching her scramble, trying to twist the story to make herself the victim, was pathetic. But it didn't matter. Her reputation had already been obliterated, and the evidence was splattered all over the internet for anyone to see. The courtroom was tense. Each session felt like the pressure was building, like everything was about to explode. Sophia's lawyer tried to spin the narrative, claiming I was the one who pushed her to infidelity. But every time they spoke, I sat back, calm, letting my lawyer handle it. The judge, having already seen the evidence, didn't have much patience for her excuses. At one point, Sophia tried to choke back tears, claiming I had neglected her and that she was just looking for comfort during a rough time. But the judge wasn't having it. The evidence was irrefutable, the videos, the photos, everything. After weeks of dragged-out drama, the judge ruled in my favor. The divorce was finalized quickly. No alimony, no settlement in her favor. Sophia walked out of the courtroom with nothing but the clothes on her back and whatever dignity she could scrape together. I felt a strange, almost detached sense of relief. The marriage was over, buried for good. But there was still this heaviness in my chest that refused to lift. Sophia, on the other hand, fell apart completely after the divorce. I heard she tried reaching out to old friends, the ones who used to hang on her every word, but no one would take her calls. The scandal was too public, too all-encompassing. She tried to revive her charity work, but no one wanted to be associated with her after everything that had come to light. Her social media accounts became wastelands, filled with angry comments and mockery. I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good to watch. Eventually, Sophia hit rock bottom. I heard that she'd started seeing a therapist, desperately trying to figure out why she'd made the choices she did, why she'd thrown everything away for nothing. But honestly, I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. She had dug her own grave, and now she had to lie in it. Every so often, she would send me long, tearful emails, begging for forgiveness, apologizing for what she had done. But I never responded. I was done. Let her wallow in the mess she created. As for my father, William, his life had unraveled in a similar way. His wife, who had been his partner for decades, filed for divorce as soon as the news broke. She didn't even give him the chance to explain himself. Then his business partners started jumping ship. Deals he had spent years building evaporated in the blink of an eye. The man who had once been the foundation of our family, the person I looked up to, was now a disgrace, a ghost of the man he once was. One day, I got a message from him. He said he wanted to talk, wanted to make things right, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I didn't have the energy to pretend like there was any redemption left for us. The man who had betrayed me was no longer the father I knew. He was just some stranger, and I didn't owe him anything. The divorce, the scandal, the fallout, it all drained me. For a while, I went through the motions, just trying to survive each day. I packed up and moved out of the house, leaving behind the place where Sophia's shadow still lingered. I found a small apartment, somewhere far from the life we'd built together. Starting over at my age felt like being dropped into the deep end of the pool when you've forgotten how to swim. I threw myself into work, hoping it would silence the rage and confusion swirling in my head. The anger, the bitterness, they didn't disappear right away, but they dulled over time. Slowly, people I hadn't spoken to in years started reaching out. At first, I hesitated to reconnect. I'd isolated myself from everyone while I was trying to make my marriage work. But now that Sophia was gone, I began to realize how much I had pushed away. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I was walking in a fog, questioning how my life had fallen apart so completely. But I kept going, one foot in front of the other. I started running again, something I hadn't done in years. It helped clear my mind, helped me focus on something other than the wreckage of my past. Little by little, I began to feel like myself again. The man I used to be before Sophia came along, before I let myself become so consumed by her that I couldn't see the red flags. I began to see that life was bigger than the pain I'd gone through. There were people who still cared, people who had been there for me even when I had shut them out. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe there was hope again. When the divorce was finalized, I knew I had to leave the city. Every street, every corner, every place we'd been together was too much to bear. So, I packed up, leaving behind the memories that still clung to me, and moved to a small town where no one knew my name. At first, it felt strange living alone again. The silence was deafening, but over time, I found comfort in it. I began to focus on myself, something I hadn't done in so long. I started exercising, reading, even taking short trips. Felt like I was learning how to breathe again. Those months were some of the hardest and most healing of my life. I realized how much I had lost of myself during my marriage. The solitude gave me a chance to heal. I reached out to old friends, the ones I had pushed away. To my surprise, they welcomed me back with open arms. No questions asked. They never held it against me. They just listened, which was exactly what I needed. One day, while I was traveling, I ran into Claire, an old acquaintance from college. We hadn't been close back then, but now there was an immediate connection. We started meeting up, no expectations, just enjoying each other's company. As we spent more time together, something real began to grow between us. Claire was everything Sophia wasn't: kind, patient, understanding. With her, I could just be myself without the fear of judgment. I was cautious, though. The scars from Sophia's betrayal were still fresh, and I wasn't sure if I could trust anyone again. But Claire was different. She never rushed me, never pushed me to open up when I wasn't ready. She simply showed up for me in ways I never even knew I needed. Slowly, I began to believe that something real might actually be possible again. Then Sophia sent me another email. It was full of apologies, telling me she was working at a cafe now, trying to rebuild her life. She begged for forgiveness, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I had moved on. She had made her choices, and I had no reason to go back to that chapter. With Claire, everything felt different. We weren't perfect, but there was something safe, something real between us. We took it slow, building trust and understanding. One night, as we watched the city lights from her balcony, she told me, "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Ethan." For the first time, I truly believed her. I realized that the betrayal didn't define me. It was just a chapter one had to close. As our relationship grew, I found a new sense of purpose. It wasn't about replacing what I'd lost, but discovering a life where I could finally be happy again. Claire was a part of that, but so was learning to trust myself. Sophia is still out there somewhere, trying to piece together her broken life. My father is facing the consequences of his choices, alone. But none of that matters to me anymore. I'm focused on the future, on building something real with Claire. I'm no longer the broken man who stumbled upon the affair. I've moved past the anger, the bitterness. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and for the first time in a long while, that's enough.